Hello, I'm Darm again. Today's topic comes from some questions asking, why do some people dig their heels in even when they know they're in error? They double down on bad ideas even when they know they're bad ideas, and sometimes even to the point of seeming ridiculous. So today I'm going to look at some of the motivations and reasons behind why some people refuse to accept their own errors, give some general low-level examples, some of which we all do from time to time, but I'm also going to look at it through the lens of the dark personality types. So if you find this topic interesting, please consider subscribing. Now, first of all, the term doubling down can be used in different contexts. It could refer to someone who increases their efforts to achieve a goal or complete a task. It can also refer to someone who can strongly defend their position with facts, logic, or reasoning. But then there are those who cannot or will not acknowledge that they may be wrong or at fault. And the psychological trait of disagreeableness is a common characteristic associated with narcissism. And doubling down in the context of being disagreeable involves persistently maintaining a position, often to the point of stubbornness. And this is whenever faced with honest feedback, opposing viewpoints, or even contradictory evidence. They won't accept new information, they don't acknowledge their mistakes, and can often go through incredible mental gymnastics, engage in nonsensical word salad, just to avoid being seen as being wrong. And this kind of behaviour can hinder growth, it hinders open dialogue, collaboration. It also affects someone's ability to consider alternative perspectives. So some examples of doubling down could be, first of all, whenever someone refuses to shift on their beliefs, even when they're presented with logical arguments that contradict their views. For instance, someone might persistently support a particular political policy, despite evidence of its cost, or indeed its harmful consequences. During a debate, someone might double down on their stance, become more insistent, and refuse to consider alternative viewpoints or evidence that is presented by the opposing side. And this can sometimes lead to a deadlock in the discussion, which in some cases may actually be the intent. In a work context, an employee might work even harder on a particular strategy, even when guidance shows that an alternative approach might be more effective. And lastly, in a group setting, someone might double down on a controversial opinion or a bad idea, refuse to yield or change their viewpoint despite receiving honest feedback or constructive criticism from others. So why are some people so stubborn in their arguments, their positions, even when they can't back them up? Well, there are many reasons for this. There could be embarrassment, sometimes even shame, at the thought of having made an error or having made a poor choice. So some people might persevere in the hope that things will work out and they can prove themselves right. But there is also what's known as cognitive bias, and this is whenever someone accepts information or ideas that support their beliefs, but they filter out and reject information that doesn't. New information or new evidence can cause a cognitive dissonance, and that dissonance might bring an emotional distress, so they reject anything that they believe might cause an overwhelming sense of anxiety or shame or any kind of threat to their deeply held beliefs. But when it comes to the dark personality, sometimes we may see the same reasons. However, the ways in which they double down can be more than just being stubborn, opinionated, or inflexible. The dark personality consists of very strong traits of, first of all, psychopathy, which is being callous and having a disregard for the well-being and the safety of others. There is also a lack of remorse. There's narcissism, which is being highly disagreeable, being highly resistant to criticism. There's a lack of empathy for others, and a huge sense of entitlement. There's Machiavellianism, which is being both manipulative and duplicitous. And lastly, sadism. This is taking pleasure in the pain and the misery of others, either causing it for gratification or using it to control others. So what happens when these personality traits combine and they are confronted with error or wrongdoing? Well, first of all, there is what's known as the Darvo method, and I have made a video on that previously if you want to watch that. But what that involves is they deny any wrong and then attack the other person or their argument in order to discredit them, but they do it from a position of victimhood. They are being victimized for having their wrongdoing or their errors pointed out in the first place. Now, if they can't make counterclaims to defend their positions rationally, then they might just attack that person's credibility. And this usually involves accusations of being hateful, bigoted, or whatever happens to suit their narrative. They can also try to provoke someone into reacting in a way that makes them look as if they are being attacked. And this is commonly referred to as reactive abuse. And again, I've made a video on that if you want to watch that for more information. Next, they might engage in some kind of psychological sleight of hand. They try to destroy their opponent's credibility by digging up past errors, past indiscretions, or indeed any associations they may have had. They look for anything they can find to discredit their opponent, and that is now the issue that's being focused on, so they don't necessarily have to explain or defend anything. The other person does. But if they can't find anything, well, they might use even more sophisticated manipulation techniques. They might craft elaborate stories, use strategic misinformation to defend their position, or again, to divert attention away from themselves. It's really just a form of gaslighting. It's shifting the focus, it's shifting the narrative, and it reinforces their belief in their sense of superiority. Now, in some extreme cases, they can become very vindictive, and here we would see both the sadistic and the callous side of them. So they might threaten, become cruel, or even escalate their cruelty. If they can't attack the person directly, they'll try to hurt them by hurting something or someone close to them. They might attack their family, their jobs, careers, their social support network, try to have them cancelled. And if they belong to a particular group, they might try to enlist the help of others in that group to target their opponent as well. And social media has made this easier for them to recruit others, and it works in the sense that they feel validated, other people support them. It also creates a mob mentality. Their opponent becomes bombarded with insults, threats, and has to defend themselves against multiple attacks. These tactics serve as a means to not just shut down any opposition, but also as a warning to others as well. And in some cases, they can do all this with a lack of concern over the impact they're having, the lack of care over the consequences of their actions. They believe they're justified. In some cases, they might even take pleasure in the distress they're causing. Here again, we not just see the callous side, but also the lack of remorse. So that's just a few ways that dark personality types might double down, but what are their motives? Well, they might believe they're entitled to behave any way they like, due to perhaps some sense of moral or intellectual superiority. But we also see a lack of humility. And also, another common characteristic of narcissism is a need for constant validation. They might only engage in what's known as an echo chamber, and this is like-minded people who hold the same opinions as they do, so they feel validated and supported. Even if there's no grounding in reality, they believe they have the right opinions and the right beliefs. Others validate them, and those who don't, those who question, those who challenge, well, they are the enemy. Now, an echo chamber might seem like a safe place to be, but it tends to limit the range of opinions and views that people are exposed to. This would be quite common in cults or cult-like movements. They don't encourage critical thinking, and they hinder people's ability to consider alternative views. There is also what's known as groupthink, which again is something of a cult-like mentality. Everyone in that group all think and believe the same things, so they all get to feel a part of something, but any perceived attack on any one person in that group, well, it can feel as if they are being attacked personally. And any actions they take are because of the emotional wounds they feel. What we sometimes see is what's known as a moral immunity. The end justifies the means, and to hell with the casualties. After all, they are the wounded party. They're the ones being victimized. Another reason can be to have an error pointed out can cause intense shame, so they double down, reject any conflicting views or information that might challenge them. So they fight even harder just to not be wrong. But the more they dig their heels in, the greater the shame if they have to back down, so the harder they fight. It's like a negative feedback loop, which is why they keep on attacking, throwing anything they can in the hope that something sticks. And quite commonly, people with very deeply ingrained narcissistic traits lack emotional insight, so they know they are upset or in pain, but they might not necessarily know why. And the responsibility for that pain often gets projected out onto others. They get blamed for causing the pain. Another reason can be Sometimes what we see is rigid thinking and a lack of humility. It's like good people do good things and bad people do bad things. They can go from being pushy in their opinions, their beliefs, their demands, to being very punishing in their anger. And lastly, one of the reasons why they double down the way they do, they dig their heels in, is because they've learned they can get away with it. Regardless of their tactic, they keep on going until they either destroy their opponent or they grind them down enough to silence them. So to summarize, not wanting to be wrong is really only human. All of us can be stubborn at times. We can even feel embarrassed at how wrong or mistaken we can be sometimes. But not accepting that we can be in error at times can deter personal development and intellectual growth. It also damages interpersonal relationships. Personally, I don't think those who dig their heels and never back down, even when they and everyone else know that they're clearly wrong, I don't think they're actually showing any sign of strength. Rather, they're showing signs of weakness. Getting the last word doesn't mean that you're right or you've won anything. Sometimes all it means is you got the other person to shut up, and that's not the same thing. So there are my thoughts on the dark personality and doubling down. Now, as always, if there's anything you might like to add, anything I've missed, please feel free to leave your thoughts. But if you found this topic interesting, please consider subscribing. And until next time, thanks for joining me.